Welcome to Anderson Alchemy. I'm your host, Brandy Anderson. This is a space for inner work, shadow work, and transformation, where we move beyond surface understanding and begin to engage the deeper layers of the psyche, the symbolic, the unconscious, the unseen forces shaping who we are becoming. This is the work of inner alchemy. Welcome to another episode of Anderson Alchemy. I'm your host, Brandy Anderson, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Rodger Kendrick, host of There Is No Spoon podcast. He's someone I would consider a modern mystic and philosopher, constantly exploring the nature of reality, consciousness, and what lies beyond the frameworks we've been given. We've had some conversations in the past, and I always walk away from them feeling stretched in the best way. There's a depth and openness he brings that I really appreciate, and I'm excited to bring that into this conversation today. Welcome, Rodger. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Brandy, and I'm really looking forward to having this chat with you.
Yeah, me too. And lately, I've had several people reach out to me who are in the deconstruction phase of their lives. Like they're questioning the theology they were handed, and they're looking for a more experiential and expansive way of understanding reality. And they're especially wrestling with how to understand Jesus, as their theology is shifting in significant ways. Jesus is the center of the Christian faith. So when the framework of the faith that you are immersed in begins to kind of fall apart, you're often left asking, like, what do I actually believe about him now? Like, was he really born of a literal virgin? What did the cross really accomplish? If anything, is the resurrection literal or better understood in a metaphorical frame? And these really aren't just theological questions, they're deeply personal ones for most people. So today, Rodger and I are going to explore what it means to understand Jesus outside of the structures that we've been given. So Rodger, I'll let you introduce yourself, maybe tell our listeners who you are and what sort of brought you into exploring new ways of understanding Jesus.
Yes, so I've been on a journey as well for many years, and I became like a Christian when I was in my teenage years, and was going to went to different churches, Pentecostal, Anglican, Baptist, and I've been on this journey for many years. But it really came to a head in around 2019, where I started to rethink and deconstruct. There were many questions that I had in my head. I'd already done a Bachelor of Theology some years before, and that also set a load of questions in my head about faith and about a lot of things that I just thought that I just took for granted, like this is how it was, maybe like the virgin birth, or can you be gay and a Christian, and lots of different questions. And they started like coming up when I was doing that education. So it's been many, many years, but I think it came to a head around 2019, 2020. And I really started to deconstruct and really started to think through my faith and also what Jesus meant to me. So I think it's been a hard process, and it's been a process that probably took about 5 or 6 years. And I feel like I've only just in the last year come to a new understanding. And it's a constant process, and I think I'll be going through a process of faith the rest of my days here on earth. But especially about Jesus, that's one thing I didn't want to let go of. That's kind of like, thinking of Jesus as the savior of the world, and I had to rethink that. In what way was he the savior of the world? And there were many questions about that. So that process has been going on for years, and it's and I've had other people to help me as well. I've had like groups of people where we discuss our faith and discuss a new way of having faith or a new way of being spiritual. So that's what I would say my journey has been. I don't know about
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, they're very similar. And I like what you had to say about you'll probably always be wrestling with these things to some degree because, as we go along in our journey, it's good to remain open. open to new ideas and new ways of kind of framing these, these tenets of the faith or just our worldview in general, because I personally don't think that we can ever conceptualize all of it. I think that it's beyond us, really. And so I think, as we go along, we have to be flexible in our
Mm,
beliefs so that we can kind of evolve along. And so, yeah,
mm,
I appreciate that very much. And similarly, same thing with me coming through the church, being completely ingrained, conditioned with certain beliefs. Um, yeah, just and also not being able to question a lot of things, in the Christian faith. And so you're handed this theology, you're told that you must believe it, not question it. And then later on, as you deconstruct away from all of that, it's kind of a lot to unravel. And so it's kind of layer by layer. It's not something that you can shift away from completely overnight. It really takes a lot of deep digging and
mm,
wrestling. And like you, I also did not want to, throw that component out, Jesus being the central figure of the faith. And I would say perfect theology. Jesus is perfect theology. So for me, I didn't want to just toss that out. So yeah, I too had to contend with some things. And when we look at the virgin birth, like traditional Christianity typically holds like two ideas together. And one is it's often called the Immaculate Conception, which is actually about Mary herself being conceived without sin. And then separately, the virgin birth, which is the belief that Mary conceived Jesus supernaturally without a human father. And that's usually taken very literally as like a supernatural event. But when you look a little deeper, it's really not as straightforward. Like the Hebrew word Alma, which is translated virgin, doesn't strictly mean virgin, it more broadly means young woman.
mm,
But in the New Testament, it translates into a word that clearly means virgin. So the question becomes, was the original intention pointing to a virgin in a biological sense? Or was it later interpreted that way? And then when you zoom out even further, you start to see, that stories of virgin births actually predate Jesus, showing up in other cultures and mythologies. So it raises the question, are we looking at a literal biological miracle? Or are we looking, at a metaphor that's been used across cultures to describe something maybe sacred that's entering the human experience? Roger, how did you understand the virgin birth during your time in the church? And how has your view shifted over time as you've left the church and deconstructed a lot of that evangelical theology?
yeah, that's a very good question. I I think the virgin birth was probably one of the first things that I looked at, and I
Mm,
started to change my view upon. When I was back in Bible college doing my Bachelor of Theology, there were a number of lecturers that did question the virgin birth, and for them, it didn't make Jesus any less divine. And I think what I would say today is no less divine than any of us are. But I think that needs some unpacking as well, especially
yeah.
if you're newly deconstructing, that can be a tough one to take. But it was one of the first things that I really started to look at. And for me, it didn't diminish the power of Jesus. It didn't diminish the possible miracles that Jesus did, depending on if you believe, they were either metaphorical or they were actual miracles that he did. For me, it didn't diminish it at all. And I could still see that Jesus, as a soul, walked the earth as a very powerful soul, also connected to God, Great Spirit, however you would describe, um, the divine in that way. So for me, that was one of the first things that I looked at, and I wasn't like wedded to the idea. I don't think I ever really was wedded to the idea of the virgin birth, but I went along with it because it was standard theology in most churches.
Yeah, I mean I echo everything that you said. I mean, I always understood it sort of implied also that you didn't question certain aspects of the faith, and that was one of them that you didn't question. Yeah, it was obviously it made no sense to me really, but it was not something I felt that I could even question. And when you're inside of an echo chamber like that, it wouldn't do any good to question anyway. Like there wouldn't be any productive discourse around it. But at a certain point, I realized that genuine faith isn't about certainty. It's about questioning and wrestling and cultivating, an open heart posture. And I like what you had to say about, whether Jesus is divine or not is not contingent on whether, he was born of a literal virgin. When you begin to see that we are all infused with divinity, we are all fully human and fully divine. And so, yeah. So it wasn't, I guess, until later after my grandmother crossed and I asked my sources through the veil, specifically my grandmother, if the virgin birth was literally true. Was Mary a literal physical virgin when she conceived Jesus? And she said yes. And it kind of stunned me a little bit. I kind of expected the answer to be no. I had come to a place where I thought that perhaps, like I was saying, that Hebrew word, maybe it really didn't literally mean virgin in the way that it had been translated. And I actually asked this question on several occasions, like to my grandmother, to my sources through the veil, because it's a lot to wrap the mind around. And I had come to believe that it probably wasn't literally true. And it wasn't until later, when I engaged the work of Paul Wallace, that it really started to click for me, though. And his work really helped tie up a lot of those loose ends for me. Like engaging his work opened the door for me to understand the virgin birth in a new way.
Mm.
So the way that I would probably articulate it now is that that Mary was a virgin inseminated, maybe by an advanced intelligence in some way, a manipulation of DNA. And so that would make Jesus different from us in a way that what he embodied is, still fully human, fully divine, as we are fully human and fully divine. But when you begin to see that he was born of a literal virgin, the question becomes: is he different in a way, though, that he embodied something that's unattainable? You've heard that theory, right, Roger? I mean, how do you kind of land with that? What Paul Wallace and others like him have said about Jesus's conception?
Yes, this is very fascinating, and I've gone back and forth on this before. Um, and I think where I land now is similar to you. So my theory is, after listening to Paul Wallace and others, Mario Biglino and others, and also going back to texts that are older than the Bible, which the Bible clearly takes and takes a lot of the ideas from the Sumerian texts and other older texts, and because we two different creation accounts in Genesis, and it's clear that that Genesis, or the writer of Genesis, is drawing upon other sources. And I really do think that there is some credence to this idea that Jesus was some kind of hybrid. And that would make sense that if I could say, yeah, I would say if like it was the plan of an advanced race, or even going back to God, Great Spirit, to change, to introduce a new way of being spiritual to humanity, it would make sense that someone would come to help us in some way, and that they would be an advanced soul. So in that way, I think there has been many advanced souls that have been on this, that have walked on this planet and lived on this planet, and I think that any of us could can advance to being an advanced soul, like Jesus. I really do. I think we're all one. I think we're all connected to Great Spirit. I think we all have the potential. But I think some souls are maybe older than other souls. And there could be young souls, there could be old souls. There could be some of us. I don't know if people are familiar with the idea of reincarnation, but I do think that there is some credence to that idea as well. So therefore, there could be people on this earth that have had, 5 or 10 incarnations here. There could be others that have had thousands. And Jesus, or Yeshua, as I prefer to call him, could have had thousands of incarnations here on earth, or maybe in other planets and realms. Um, and so there, I definitely think that the idea of uh, manipulation of DNA and insemination is not a new idea, because I think that's what happened when you go back to Genesis, with Adam and Eve. um, I do believe that there was a race on this planet of humans, and they were upgraded, because when we look at science and history, we see that around 300,000 years ago, something happened to the hominid on the planet, and they were like upgraded in a way that can't be explained by evolution. So it was more of a one day to the next day type of thing, that Homo sapiens came along. So that idea, I think, is an old idea, and I think that technologically that was possible back then, and very possibly could have been done in the case of Yeshua.
Yeah, yeah. I th That's exactly the way that I have come to see it, is that a lot of what has been glossed over in the church is really, is corrected when you start to see reality through that paleo contact lens,
Mm.
and that there was advanced technology, in the past, and that those civilizations have been reset, as they say. And I think because the church put such an emphasis on the divinity of Jesus in a way that elevates him above humanity, there's this tendency of those who deconstruct to begin seeing him as not special at all or not different from us in any way. Because when you begin to see that we are all fully human and fully divine, which is what we were kind of tapping into earlier in the conversation, it seems only logical that Jesus would become just another enlightened guru, kind of just showing us the way. But I think that's an oversimplification of things. I see Jesus as fully human and fully divine, just as we are. But what sets him apart is that he is, as scripture puts it, without sin. And sin is just missing the mark. Like, it's not the bad things we do, but the distorted lens that we see through. It's disassociation. It's seeing ourselves as separate and superior, dropping into illusion, just not seeing the full picture. So, the way that I have come to understand it is that Jesus is operating at a higher level of consciousness from the jump. Like, he didn't fall asleep to the truth of his being. And because he was without sin, he was able to lay down his life in a way that the sin of the world, which is just to say the distortion of the collective, came upon him and did its worst. But he wasn't diminished. Like, he rose up from the grave because he wasn't operating from that distortion. He wasn't bound to it. Death couldn't hold him because there was nothing in him that resonated with the illusion of separation. So I see his conception as kind of ancillary, like whatever anybody wants to believe about that, it doesn't change the momentum of what he accomplished. But I do understand it as a fulfillment or maybe a crystallization of that virgin birth myth. Because it's like the myths were all pointing toward what Jesus stepped into in the flesh, not really in some supernatural way as we've been taught, but through the use of advanced technology.
Yes, and I think that Jesus or Yeshua stepped into this earth already awakened, or already remembering who he was.
Yes.
Because we go on a journey, and for me, it was like took me till I was about 53 to realize that I was in a matrix, and that this world wasn't exactly what I was led to believe. And I awoke to my own divinity, or my own connection to Creator Source at that time. And I realized that, I was directly connected, which I kind of knew head knowledge before, but it became a reality for me. I really knew that I was directly connected to Creator Source. And I think the way I understand it is that Yeshua, he came in and he was already awakened to his divinity, or his connection to Creator. And I think also he came to overturn this idea of Yahweh in the Old Testament, of Yahweh being God singular and the
Mm.
creator of everything. So I think he came personally, that's what I think, that he came to change that idea, to say, people, look, you don't worship a being, a physical being. You go within and you start realizing who you really are and remembering who you really are.
Yeah, I love that. He said, he said, you are of your father, the devil. If
Yes.
you knew my father, you would not be doing the things that you are doing. And, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So I agree 100%. It was a shift away from that. It's just a lower level of consciousness, worshiping an external being, a God out there, and a capricious God at that. And so, yeah, I think Jesus, and I, to say that he came in already, advanced in his consciousness is not to say that that he was operating in a way that we cannot. He was calling us into what he modeled. He was saying every step of the way,
Mm.
follow me.
He also
He,
said, "Ye are gods."
Yes, he did. He said, "Ye are gods." And he also said, "Greater things will you do than
Mm,
these." So everything that he did, all of the miracles, all of the things that he did from that elevated state of consciousness, he was telling his followers, "You will do even greater things." And another central aspect of the Christian faith is the blood of Jesus. Like it's everywhere in the language, in worship, scripture. This idea that there's something powerful and necessary about his blood being shed. And Hebrews says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission. Ephesians says, in him we have redemption through his blood. So there's clearly something being pointed to there, this idea that the blood is doing something, accomplishing something. But how we understand what that is, that's where things really start to kind of diverge. Because I hear people sometimes say, oh, well, the blood wasn't necessary at all. People were mistaken. But the language is so embedded in scripture that it's hard to sort of just discount that it's there. And so I wrestled a lot with kind of how to make sense of that in a more expansive way. Roger, I'm curious how you see that. Like when you hear the language around the blood of Jesus, what do you think is actually being pointed to?
So I think I'm gonna be like an even bigger heretic here, probably. Um,
Bring it.
yeah, yeah. So I've reassessed also how I look at the Bible, and I think that the Bible is a wonderful collection of books that have been put together by, let's be honest, men. I don't think there's probably anything in there that is written by women, possibly Esther, some of it.
Yeah.
Um, but um, I think that in the collection, in the way that the Bible was collected and put together, there is something seriously fishy. Because there are and many other books that could have been included, like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary, some of the other books that we find in the Nag Hammadi literature. And I think you have to take the whole thing as a whole, all of the writings that are written around the time, up to a few hundred years. When you get to a few hundred years after, then it gets less reliable, of course. And also, I was totally shocked when I found out that the four gospels that are written are actually not written by like witnesses to Jesus's life. That they were written by other people that weren't the original disciples. So, and that's a consensus that most scholars have on the Bible. So I do believe that there is a lot in the New Testament that uh, that I can see Jesus saying. I really do. And when it comes to the blood, I've reassessed that a lot. I think, and I'm where I am now is I'm thinking, how was Jesus' sacrifice important? Now, when it comes to blood sacrifices, I look back to the Old Testament and I see that blood sacrifices were done um, because I'm thinking, like, okay, if this is the God creator, spirit creator of the universe, why does he need dead animals? Why does he need sacrifice? Or in some cases, the oldest son, because that was also done. A human sacrifice was also done. So why would he or she need to have that done? So I'm thinking that that is something that is bound to that, that being in the Old Testament. So then I'm thinking, okay, that's the thing that binds, that's what Christians teach is the thing that binds the Old Testament to the New Testament. The thing about sacrifice, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, that Jesus brings a new covenant. But I have gone one step further looking at that. And I think that no, Jesus did not need to die for everybody to be saved. And that's been a journey for me. That's been a journey for me because before I would have said I was a universalist and that I would just believe that the death of Jesus saves everyone. But then
Mhm.
what happened before Jesus then? Who, who was saved then, and then
Yeah.
that's also interesting. So for me, um, Jesus is a very, very powerful soul, but for me, it's not necessarily his sacrifice. And in some cases, and some histories and some texts, Jesus actually lives on. Oh, Jesus doesn't actually die on the cross, but is taken down again and lives on with Mary Magdalene and has children. Now, I think there is some credence to that story as well, though I can't say I'm 100% sure or not. So I don't know. I'm curious to know how what your
Yeah.
thinking is on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you mentioned, being saved. Jesus' death does not save us. And I think, defining saved, because that word also carries a lot of baggage in Christian faith. And so I've come to see saved not like, um, you know, forgiveness, but liberated, like liberated into something more expansive. So yeah, I jotted that down so I wouldn't forget to say that right off the jump because when you said that, that really resonated, because when I shifted from seeing, the language in the Bible of Jesus saving us from our sin being more like, or from the wrath of God, being more like, no, it's not about forgiveness. It's about being liberated from the bondage that we were in to sin. But so, yeah, it's something that I've thought a lot about. And I still don't know that I have satisfactorily resolved all the tension around it. But the way the church uh, frames it is that God demanded this blood sacrifice. And, then he sent Jesus, his only son, into the world to suffer and die to redeem humanity. And it really portrays God as a bloodthirsty tyrant. And that never really sat right with me. And I found, and I'm sure you have read read his work too. But Girard, his mimetic theory, it was really helpful in shifting me into a more expansive view of the cross years ago. So instead of seeing blood as payment to God, it reframes the cross as like an exposure of those corrupt systems. So Jesus was killed by the very systems that he challenged, like the religious and the political systems. And in his innocence, those systems are revealed for what they truly are. So instead of the blood satisfying God, the cross exposes the violence that we participate in. And in seeing that clearly, there's a kind of liberation in that. So because we're no longer unconsciously participating in that same pattern. And I think that's just really one layer of what's happening. I don't think it stops there. The way that I see it is that the crucifixion doesn't just reveal our core issue, as Gerard, proposed, it also changes what is possible. I believe the death and resurrection of Jesus ontologically changed the world. And the way I like to say it is that Jesus punched out a portal into a higher dimension into which we will all follow. It's what Christians would call resurrection. And I see it as a dimensional shift. He said, when I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. So the word draw is really better translated drag. And the way that we're all caught up, is it's like we're all caught up in this cosmic vortex and it's pulling us into this higher dimension where death doesn't exist. So, at the resurrection, Jesus walked through walls, he materialized and dematerialized. But he was also tangible, like he ate fish, his disciples touched him. So I would say that, that's the imperishable body that Paul spoke of. So whatever it was that Jesus entered into, that's where this whole thing is headed. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of how I see it, that his death did save us, not like from the wrath of God, but it liberated us into a higher dimension in which we are all headed. We're not there yet, but we're headed in that direction. Anyway, I know you have a lot of interdimensional insight, Roger. So I'd love to hear your
Mm.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, so I'm not, like I said before, I'm not 100% sure that Jesus was resurrected in that way, but I am absolutely open for that idea as well, because I do think there is a way, like what you talked about, there is a way to understand resurrection where that Jesus, as an advanced soul, um, if he had been resurrected, came back. He came back in his, can we say, yeah, interdimensional body, if you could say it,
Yeah.
um, because if we look at if we look at stories like NDEs, near death experiences, people that go out of body, people that understand that we do have an energy body and that can actually leave our body and come back to our body. But at the point of death, this energy body or soul, or however you want to describe a spirit or whatever it is, does leave the body, but has the possibility to, can we say, travel to the upper levels of the astral realm and also to come back as a physical being. But I think what's fascinating to me is that Jesus could actually have come back as a higher dimensional or higher density being. In many ways, like certain extraterrestrials live in a higher density of matter so that they can phase into our reality and show themselves and then phase out of that reality and go back to their reality. So, in the
Hmm.
same way, I do think that it is possible that Jesus could have done that. And also, the disciples talked about they were on the road with him and they didn't recognize him. So, he could have taken another form. So obviously, if this is true, he could have had the ability to change his appearance, because he was in a higher density of matter. So I think in that way that really explains it, and it's actually, if true, I'm on board with that. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I've come to see it, that he manifested from, like, a higher density, that's what the resurrection was, and not really like a resuscitation of his actual physical body that went into the grave. Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about, and it's one of those things that I don't think we'll ever have, like, all of the answers. I don't think we're supposed to. I wonder how much does it actually matter what we believe about all of this? Like, I meet with people in coaching and spiritual direction who really wrestle to iron out beliefs, and many feel really torn, like, and twisted internally about it, and I'm thinking maybe the question isn't whether the virgin birth or the resurrection, really happened the way that we're told, or whether, I think it's more about, are we allowing something new to be born within us, and less about if these things literally happen in the way that we've been told. So
Mm.
I think it's easy to get lost in these concepts and lose sight of what needs to, like, die within us so that something new can rise up without clinging to the old structures that shaped us, because people land in very different places almost every theological point. Like, conceptually, I don't think we'll ever have everything figured out. So how important do you think it is, like, to iron out these beliefs around these points in faith? Yeah, how have you kind of metabolized that in your own deconstruction?
Mm. Yeah, well, I used to think it was really, really important
Yeah,
because that's the reason why I would did my Bachelor of Theology, because I wanted to get theology just right. I think, oh, I
yeah,
really need to get it right. I need to study the Bible. I need to look at it in many different ways. I need to find out what's metaphorical, what's historical, what actually did happen, what didn't happen, and I really wanted to get it right. And
yeah,
as a Christian, I don't bebride anyone for doing that. I think it's very
yeah,
noble because it's a way of working things out. So, but as I've deconstructed over the years, I found out that it's less and less important about what you believe, but more and more important about why you believe what you believe.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in the way that, okay, I believe in pink fairies or something like that, you know. But of course, it's important. The things you believe are important in the way that, you believe in love, you believe in loving your neighbor, you believe in loving yourself, you believe in a way of the way of peace,
Yeah.
walking life as a peace, like as many people call Jesus the Prince of Peace. So I think walking the way of peace is very, very important. So, but I believe less and less, exactly these little faith details. You have to believe in this, you have to believe in that, and you have to believe that. Like the Nicene Council, they had this big argument of was Jesus of the same essence. They had to point out, yeah, Jesus was exactly the same essence as God,
Yeah.
and there was this, there was someone saying that it was a similar essence, and and they got totally wrapped up. They got totally wrapped up in this argument that is just useless at the end of the day, because it's more about of what kind of person are you? What do you want to embody on this earth? What do you want to yeah, and you can do that whichever religion you're in, I think, and and even if you're not in a religion, even if you're an atheist, you can
Yeah.
embody the character and love of Jesus and the way of peace. I firmly believe that Jesus came from an order called the Essenes, and they were very much, an order that believed that peace was the way, that peace was the way forward. And they were a very advanced culture of people where women and men had exactly the same. They were listened to exactly the same in the same way. It wasn't like women had to be quiet, things like that. So I think that Jesus came from that kind of culture, and that's why that he lifted women up. Because in this male-dominated culture that he was in, and we're still in it today a little bit, but where at the time of Jesus, that culture was like very male-dominated, and women didn't really have much to say about religious and faith things at that time.
Yeah, yeah, that's very well said. Coming from that same Christian background, everything was always just very conceptual. So I too thought that my beliefs mattered, a great deal. And I am a conceptual person by nature. Like I'm in my thoughts a lot. I philosophize. I think. I enjoy ironing things out cerebrally. So yeah, I went through that my own journey. I thought it was important to have certainty, to know, with clarity. And I think now for me, I think it matters. What we believe does matter, but maybe not in the way that we were taught, or maybe not in that same desire for certainty, that desire to know all the things, because we can't know all the things. I don't think it's about getting every detail right, kind of like what you were saying too, Roger. Like having the correct interpretation of the virgin birth or the mechanics of the resurrection. But I do think our view of God matters, because if we're seeing God as someone who demands blood, or requires violence, or who needs to be appeased, that shapes how we relate to God, to ourselves, and to other people. And I don't think that leads to transformation. I think it just reinforces fear and separation. But at the same time, I don't think we have to have everything perfectly conceptualized either. I don't think the invitation is to figure out every detail of what happened as much as it is to like engage with what the story is pointing to. So for me, the question becomes less about like, do I believe, that this happened exactly in this way? And it's more about, is something being born in me that wasn't there before? Like, am I actually dying to the parts of me that are rooted in distortion, in fear and separation? Am I following Jesus? Am I living differently? Um, and I think if Jesus shows us anything, I don't think it's just, something to believe about him. It's like something to enter into. He said, take up your cross and follow me. So I think it's a paradigm shift. It's a perspective shift more than it is about getting all of those little minute details of the beliefs or the theology exactly right. It's exhausting, really. And that's why we have so many denominations now. If you look out at all these, different denominations and different variations within the denominations, and then within those, they can't get along on, that they're still, splitting hairs, fighting over the minute details. So, but I think I think it keeps us from our highest life path, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I remember back in my church, I was one of the leaders in my church, and sometimes we had these discussions about what the church down the road was doing or what they believed in. And so, and some of them had like a bar, alcohol after the service, and then
Yeah.
we were saying to each other, "Oh, you can't do that." uh,
Yeah.
and it was like we were nitpicking other churches, and it was just terrible. Afterwards, like I was ashamed, a few years after that, thinking, how could I think like that? How could I? So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very important. And if people who are deconstructing, if they want to just if they want to carry on going to their church and they find value in that, by all means do it. I mean, I have a friend who has been deconstructing for some years as well, and he still, occasionally goes to church, and he finds it very giving when it comes to the fellowship in the church. Now, personally, I find it very difficult to go back to church because of the theology, and because I'm essentially a theologian and been much, involved in theology and getting theology right. And every time I hear, something that grates on me, maybe, going back to Old Testament theology or blood sacrifice or angry God, then I find it really hard to be in that environment. But
Yeah.
but I'm happy to discuss it with anyone. So I think, fellowship. I think when Jesus was talking about koinonia, which is like fellowship, he wasn't really thinking about hundreds of people meeting in a building on a Sunday morning so much. Although even though that can be okay, that can be totally fine. But I think he was thinking about groups of people meeting because if it's true that where two or three are gathered, then the spirit is there, the divine is there. And I think that's very important. I think we're social beings. I think we're designed for fellowship. I think we're designed to harmonize and work together, and we work things out better when we talk to each other. Just like the conversation we're having now, we we,
Yeah.
we do better, and if we're socially involved. So I think that if I have groups, I have a couple of groups where we gather and we talk about where our faith is today, or how our spirituality has developed, maybe past the theology of the Bible. And I think that's very important. And I think that's Jesus would clap in his hands, with
Yeah.
seeing that people are getting together and discussing these kind of thing and having fellowship and discussing how do we change the world? How do we first change us? Because that's the most important thing, to know how to love ourselves and to change ourselves. But then having done, or you never finish doing that, but having working on that, how do we how do we become a part of the world where we are with to change it?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think community is really important, and I think that's what Jesus was pointing to. We need community, but the church has become something so systemic and cultish in some ways. So I hesitate to use that word, but it is very, it's an echo chamber. And so I think community needs to be more organically flowing for it to benefit us, where you're able to speak freely, also share your views, wrestle with things, be open minded, open hearted. Because when you are plugged into a gathering where you all share the same views or you're no longer welcome. It's like you have to believe
Mm,
these things and you're being given a set of beliefs to adhere to. That really shifts it into something else entirely. That's not really community anymore. That's something else entirely. And it is hard to keep that balance because as people, we tend to get in the ditch, because I would say it's because of our binary thinking. It's because people who have not, transcended the binary mind, people who are still caught in dualistic thinking, that's what they do to everything that they touch. It turns into some rigid system. Um, and I keep coming back to something I've heard Richard Rohr say, that Jesus never actually said, worship me. He said, follow me.
mm.
And that, I feel like that's a really important distinction to make because it shifts the focus from belief about Jesus to a relationship with Jesus, and even more than that, to embodiment, right? Like, so it's not just what do I think about him, what are my beliefs, but what does it actually look like to follow him, like to live in alignment with what he was pointing to. Roger, I'm curious for you, as your understanding of Jesus kind of shifted over time, how has that shaped your relationship with Jesus? Like, how do you relate to Jesus now?
Yeah, I like that because just the other day, somebody asked me that, well, similar question. They asked me, "What do you think?" And they used the word Yeshua because the original name. They said, "What do you think Yeshua is to our world today? In what way is he still operating and helping people or guiding people?" And that was a very, very interesting question. And we had a little conversation about that. And some of the things I was thinking on at that time was that I really do believe that Jesus is a very advanced and powerful soul splash spirit that I think still has interest in Earth, whether whatever he is doing now, if he's incarnate, I don't know. There's so many questions that and it doesn't really matter. Um, but I think that um, definitely there could definitely be a lot of people on this planet that have a connection to him or believe they have a connection to him and that he guides their life. So I don't want to poo-poo that in any way. I don't want to like say no, it's not, he maybe only just hangs out with a few people. I don't know how it works. I really don't know. And I don't know how it would be if when I transcend, how in what way will people be connected to me and how many people will be connected to me, or maybe if I become a guide, who knows? I've heard about people, I've heard stories about people saying that a guide appears to them or speaks telepathically to them and says, well, we hang out in another life together, and I agreed to be your guide in this life. And I really believe that happens. So in the same way, I do believe that Jesus could be a guide to many people, and it could be in the thousands or the millions. I don't know. I'm willing to say I don't know on this subject, but I'm also willing to say it's possible. It's definitely
Yeah.
possible. Because he really is a very advanced and powerful soul, in the same way that some people might say that they feel maybe Buddha still speaks to them, or someone
Yeah.
else, or some people talk about Saint Germain, or other people, and some people have a connection to, say, they have connection to advanced beings, extraterrestrial beings in higher densities and dimensions, and they get a name for that, or a collective. So I'm still very like open to all of these ideas. I'm not wedded to any one idea, and I definitely do think that if you want Jesus to guide you and you ask, I definitely think that he can do that.
Yeah, that's very well said. I agree. I preface what I say also with I don't know
Mm.
because I don't know how all of that works, like you were saying. But I do believe that we have the experience that we need to have. So, seeing the way that I see reality, and I think you do too, Roger, is that we are all one consciousness. So we are all just expressions of one consciousness of the divine. And so, yeah, if someone wants to cultivate a relationship, like a personal relationship with Jesus and be guided by Jesus, I believe that's absolutely possible. I believe we're having the experience that we need to have that will bring us into our highest life path. And for some people, that may be Buddha. For some people, it may be an archangel or whatever resonates. And I believe that's also, like, we mentioned Jesus on the road to Emmaus and how he maybe concealed his identity or manifested in a different way until he wanted to reveal himself. I believe it's nuanced. I don't know how all of that works or the whys behind all of it, but yeah, all of those things. But I see Jesus as like a tension of opposites, fully human, fully divine, perfectly balanced and reconciled. So I see him as our collective guide out of conflict and duality. So for me, Jesus represents what I would just call the Christ consciousness, that fully awakened, fully aligned state of being. And I don't see that as something exclusive to him. Like he said, you will do even greater things, like I already said. So it's something he was inviting all of us into. And I see it as something he embodied without distortion, though. So my relationship to him now is less about devotion in that traditional sense and more about orientation. Like, am I moving toward that same alignment? Am I living with that same awareness? Yeah, that's just kind of how I see it. It's the Christ consciousness is something that we can all embody and experience.
Yes, exactly. And I would say in the spiritual community, they talk a lot about Christ consciousness. So the understanding is that the Christ is coming back, but not in the way that Jesus is going to come back physically as a being and sort out all this mess we're in now.
Yeah.
But it is the fact that we have the Christ consciousness inside of us, and as more people become awakened to that fact, then collectively we can all help. In this shift, in shifting the earth into a more of a new earth, you could say. Um, but it's just a progression. It's just we're progressing, into a new paradigm where we will no longer be slaves. We will no longer be
Yeah.
slaves to the systems that you could say the old gods
Yeah.
created. So we finding out now that yes, we are the answers to our own prayers in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. We are the return of Christ.
Mm.
I mean, and you see the language in the Bible, the body of Christ, you are the hands and feet of Jesus. Um, it's articulated a little differently, and a lot of people would say it's heretical to say you are the return of Christ, but that's what it is. It's that collective consciousness rising up to a certain level, a tipping point, so to speak, that we shift into a new heaven and a new earth, like all things new. So, yeah, I echo what you said. I believe that Jesus is our guide into that. That's what he's calling us into, that elevated way of seeing and being in the world where the lion lies down with the lamb. That's what, the prophetic vision was all about, bringing us into a higher state of consciousness where there is no war, no violence against one another, where we are all living in harmony. So it's not about getting rid of necessarily the opposites. It's about bringing them into integration with properly integrated. Um, yeah. And I think, yeah, as we close out today, are there any thoughts that you'd like to leave with our listeners? I believe we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else that maybe we didn't touch on, or anything else you'd like to say?
I think I'd just like to say if there's anyone like listening to this podcast that is going through a deconstruction, I would just say I would like to encourage you because it is very lonely and can be very, very isolating going through a deconstruction because typically you will be the only one in your family or in your friend group that goes through this. If you're lucky, you will have one or two others to share that experience with, and that can be real big help. But if you are going through it and you suddenly, it's not like you wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm just going to deconstruct everything." You know, it's a gradual thing, and you start questioning your reality, and you start awakening to the truth of who you are. And it's because you're actually becoming awake that you start questioning. And so I just want to encourage people to say that you're not going crazy when you start questioning your faith, because some people could start questioning themselves and say, "Oh no, I must be wrong. Maybe I should just, continue the way I was before." And I think that would be a shame. But just, I would say, be encouraged, find good people. Go online. Find podcasts like this. Write to Brandy, ask her questions. uh, and get get in contact with other people. There's lots of online groups as well. If you can't find a group you locally, there's lots of online groups that you can join, maybe on Facebook or other places, and to discuss, the questions that you're having around faith. And just remember, there's no wrong questions. Questioning is good and healthy, and I just want to leave you with that encouraging thought.
I love that because you do feel as though the rug has been pulled out from under your feet when you begin to deconstruct. It is very unmooring. But yeah, but life is a dance. So there never was any ground under your feet to begin with. You just thought
Mm.
there was. So yeah, we want certainty, we want control, but control is an illusion. And so, yeah, it's about learning to ride the waves. And so, yeah, if you're in that place, I echo what Roger was saying. Just find community to wrestle with these things, and don't be frightened back into a structured system that no longer resonates with your soul, because ultimately that's constricting, and it will not bring you into your highest life path. So, yeah, and I think what I'd like to leave everyone with is that we do need beliefs that we can rest in. So it's not about throwing all of your beliefs aside. It's something that grounds us, like something that orients us. So beliefs are important, but not beliefs that bind us up or make us feel like we have to get everything exactly right. And at the same time, I think we have to be willing to rest in some mystery, like to not have all the answers, to stay open to what we don't yet understand. Because at the end of the day, it's not about figuring everything out or finding all the answers. It's about engaging life with an open heart. So yeah. Well, Roger, thank you so much for being here with me today. I always enjoy our conversations, and this was no exception.
Likewise, Brandy, it's always a joy to talk with you and chat with you, and really get down to some nitty-gritty
Yeah.
theologically and
Yeah.
ontologically, whatever, spiritually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. We'll have to do it again sometime soon. Yeah, well, Roger's contact info will be in the show notes below. So everybody reach out, show him some love, engage with his podcast. Also, a quick reminder, Dream Alchemy, my monthly dream group, meets the last Tuesday of every month from 6 to 8 p.m. Central. I'm also offering a limited number of mini dream work sessions. If you've been curious about your dreams or feel like there's something in them that you can't quite access on your own, this is a really powerful way to step into that, because our dreams tend to show us what we need to know before we know it consciously. They reveal what's just beneath the surface, what's trying to emerge, what's being asked to be seen or integrated. So if that resonates with you, you can find more information in the show notes below. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Anderson Alchemy. As always, cosmic blessings and peace.